Hannah waited awake in the dark kitchen, without lighting the lantern, until she heard the sound she already recognized. Careful footsteps on the frozen mud. The dull thud of firewood being stacked against the wall. She walked carefully and opened the door before the man in the yard had finished. Caleb Ward stopped with a split log in his hand, wearing the expression of someone who had been caught by surprise in the middle of doing something wrong, his breath turning into smoke in the air before sunrise. "How long has it been you?" Hannah asked, crossing her arms over her chest. "2 winters," Caleb answered, avoiding her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" He looked at the pile of firewood, then at her. "John made me promise before he passed away that you would never be cold during the next winter," Caleb said. Hannah pulled the shawl over her shoulders. The sky in the east was beginning to brighten in a gray band over the mountains. "John asked for that for 1 winter," Hannah said. "You've been bringing firewood for 2. The promise ended a long time ago." She took a step outside without taking her eyes off the cowboy in front of her. "I want to know why you still keep doing it, Caleb." The cowboy, who knew how to answer any question about cattle, fences, weather, and land, had no answer when he heard Hannah's question. He remained silent for a while, with the firewood between them, and the truth on the verge of changing everything between them. Wyoming, 1884. Hannah Doyle was 30 years old and managed alone the ranch that had once belonged to her and her late husband John. 300 acres of tall grass and a shallow creek in the Northern Territory, land her husband had opened up, and that her own hands now did what they could to keep. She took care of the cattle, repaired her own fences, negotiated calf prices in the town of Ashford, and returned home tired every late afternoon, with the satisfaction of someone who had done what needed to be done. What she no longer had, and had stopped waiting for after 2 years, was someone waiting for her when the door closed at the end of the day. John died of a fever 2 winters ago. It was not sudden. The illness took 3 months to do what it did, and in a way that was much worse, because she watched it happen without being able to do anything to stop it. After John came mourning, and with it the work that grew every day, and finally a quietness that she stopped separating from contentment. Hannah was 30 years old, had a ranch, a horse, and an old dog named Rufus, who asked for nothing more than her affection and presence. And that was how, without truly deciding, Hannah concluded that what she had was enough. Caleb Ward lived on the ranch to the north, on the other side of the creek. He was 38 years old, had never married, and had been John's friend since before Hannah came to that part of the country. The 2 men had built together half the fences that now separated the properties. And when John fell ill, it was Caleb who rode to Ashford to fetch the doctor 3 times, facing the snow along the way. And when John passed away, it was Caleb who helped dig the grave beneath the poplar tree east of the house, and afterward left in silence, carrying the pain of losing his best friend. What he began doing, starting with Hannah's first winter alone, was keeping the promise he had made by bringing firewood whenever it was needed. Caleb did not ask for thanks, nor did he knock on the door. He arrived before sunrise and left the split logs stacked against the kitchen wall, leaving before Hannah woke up. At first she thought it had been an old arrangement made by John, an agreement with some neighbor she did not know. Later she realized that no one was being paid, because the bill never came. The firewood simply appeared every few days throughout the last 2 winters, dry and split to the right size, stacked carefully. She never saw who did the work, until that morning. During those 2 years they spoke little. Caleb appeared by the fence near the creek when she was repairing a post, rested his hand on the wire, and commented on the weather. Hannah brought bread to his ranch whenever she baked extra, and stayed for a moment on the porch listening to him complain about a stubborn calf. She noticed that Caleb always listened to her attentively. She had spent her entire life around people who spoke in order to be heard. Caleb was different from all of them. Ashford had opinions about Hannah Doyle. Small towns always do, and a young widow running a good piece of land by herself provided conversation all year long. The strongest opinion concerned Edmund Shaw, the owner of the general store, 40 years old, also a widower, serious and respected in town. He had begun showing interest the previous spring. Nothing rude. He sent messages, showed up with supplies she had not ordered. He said the right things in the right tone. The town, which had always liked Hannah, approved enthusiastically. Edmund had means, had good judgment, and would, everyone agreed, make a sensible second husband for Hannah, who was far too capable to wear herself out alone on that ranch. Ellen, Hannah's friend since childhood, married and therefore an authority on the matter, spoke directly one afternoon in the kitchen. "Edmund is a good man, Hannah," Ellen said. "It's been 2 years since John passed away. No one will judge you." "I know no one will," Hannah replied. "So?" Ellen asked. Hannah looked out the window toward the creek and the ranch on the other side and sighed. "So nothing," Hannah said. "Not yet." And she did not say the rest, because even she had not yet spoken it aloud, and things spoken aloud begin to exist in a way she was not ready to face. The snow came heavily in January, covering the grass and closing the road to Ashford for nearly a week. Hannah spent those days between the barn and the kitchen, breaking the ice in the water trough morning and afternoon, counting the cattle, mending whatever could be mended inside the house. The firewood kept appearing. Every time the pile by the door began to shrink, the next day it would rise again, dry and split, stacked with the same care as always. Hannah began waking earlier, not to catch Caleb at work, to hear his footsteps on the frozen mud and know, before sunrise, that he had come again. She did not admit to herself what she was beginning to feel. She slowly began to admit it throughout those dark mornings, with the coffee growing cold in her hand and the pile of firewood growing outside. On a clear day when the road opened again, Edmund Shaw came to the ranch. He brought a sack of flour and a jar of preserves and stayed in Hannah's kitchen as comfortably as a man accustomed to being warmly welcomed. He talked about the store and his plans for the spring. He asked if she would attend the end-of-winter celebration in Ashford on the last Saturday of the month. "I'll think about it," Hannah said. "It's only a party, Hannah," Edmund said, smiling. "I'm not asking for anything more than a dance." "I know what you're asking for, Edmund," Hannah said, "and that's exactly why I'll think about it." He laughed without taking offense, and left without pressing for an answer. He was not a bad man, Hannah knew that, and she also knew he was a reasonable choice. The town was right about that. After he left, Hannah stood at the window, looking toward the creek and the ranch on the other side. The late afternoon sun shone on the western mountains. Somewhere over there, Caleb was doing what he always did at that hour, she knew, because she had been paying attention to him for 2 years, checking the cattle before dark. She thought about the firewood by the door, thought about Edmund Shaw and the sack of flour, and after a long while at the window, she concluded that flour was just flour, but the firewood, that was something else.
Dear listeners, before we continue, I would like to know which country you are listening from today. My name is Jocelyn Santos, the original creator of this script. The stories I create are exclusive for publication on the Boundless French Love channel because they are my own work, and I do not authorize copies or copyright registration by third parties. It means a great deal to me to know how far this voice is reaching. And if this story is keeping you company right now, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Now let's return. Because Hannah Doyle is about to ask the question Caleb Ward has spent 2
Hannah's
winters
decision
avoiding.
came on a Tuesday night. She was no longer going to wait for the firewood to appear in the dark like a favor. She was going to wait awake, and she was going to ask. She put out the lantern early, sat in the kitchen with the shawl over her shoulders and the coffee growing cold in her hand, and stayed there in the dark, listening to the house creak. It was past midnight, and Rufus slept at her feet, and once he raised his head, heard something outside, and lay back down again, which Hannah understood as a sign that it was not yet time. Near dawn, the dog got up again, and this time his ears remained alert. Then she heard the careful footsteps on the frozen mud, the dull thud of the first log on the pile. Hannah opened the door. Caleb stopped with a log in his hand. "How long has it been you?" Hannah asked. 2 winters, Caleb answered. "Why?" He slowly lowered the log onto the pile, as though buying himself time. "John made me promise," Caleb said. "At the end. He was afraid of your first winter alone, without him to chop the firewood. He made me promise I wouldn't let you be cold." "John asked for that for 1 winter," Hannah said. "You brought firewood for 2. The promise you made to him ended a long time ago, Caleb, and you kept coming." She took a step outside into the cold. "I want to know why you still come." Caleb looked at the pile of firewood. He looked at the mountains. He looked at everything except her, and when he finally spoke, his voice came out low and unhurried. "Because stopping would be," Caleb said. "I know the promise ended with the first thaw." He looked directly at Hannah. "I kept coming because I wanted to, because the best part of my day is the morning when I know you'll wake up in a warm place because I brought the firewood. It's no longer about the promise, Hannah. It stopped being about that a long time ago. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. The creek flowed in the distance. The sky was growing lighter, and neither of them moved. Hannah was about to confess, but a horse carrying a messenger interrupted the moment. While Hannah went to answer him, Caleb stacked the rest of the firewood with the same care as always and crossed the creek back before the sun rose. Hannah remained at the gate, speaking with the messenger and watching Caleb leave, and she could not tell whether she had gained or lost something. Caleb Ward was not a man who resolved things quickly. He spent the following days checking fences, riding before sunrise, and returning after dark, with a restlessness that the cattle noticed before he did. Rufus, the dog, began crossing the creek on his own and following him through the pasture, with a patience Caleb first found irritating, and then, without meaning to, comforting. What held Caleb back was not Hannah's answer. It was John's memory. He always came back to the same thought. John had been his best friend, and now he loved the woman his friend had left behind, and there was a part of him that said it was theft, that loving Hannah meant trampling on John's memory. He thought about it in every possible way, with the stubbornness that was both his best and his worst quality. Little by little, through cold nights in the empty kitchen, he stopped thinking like a guilty friend and began thinking the way John himself would have thought. John had been a practical man. If he were there, if he could speak, Caleb knew more or less what he would say, that he had not made Caleb promise to bring firewood for nothing, that perhaps, even while sick, he knew he could trust his friend to take care of her, that the love left behind after a death is not an eternal debt to the deceased. It is simply love, and love does not ask permission from what has already passed. One of those nights, Caleb realized he had been confusing two things. One was what was expected of him. A decent man honors his friend's memory by staying away from the widow. The other was what was right, honoring his friend's memory by taking care of her as his friend had asked, and by being honest about what that had become. What was expected and what was right were not the same thing. He had always known that about cattle and land. It took him 2 winters to understand that it applied to him as well. Edmund Shaw was there, and he welcomed her at the entrance to the hall, complimented her with moderation, brought her a mug of hot drink, and stayed beside her like a man who believed the evening was going in his favor. They danced and talked. Any sensible woman, the whole town seemed to say with their eyes, would seize that opportunity with both hands. It was Ellen who brought up the subject near the pie table, with the frankness of someone who believed old friendship gave her the right. "Everyone has noticed that Edmund won't leave your side," Ellen said. "Edmund is kind," Hannah said. "Edmund is more than kind, Hannah. He's the best match around here." Ellen lowered her voice. "And people are saying Caleb Ward has been leaving firewood at your door. The whole town already knows." Hannah set her mug on the table and looked directly at her friend. "Edmund brought me a sack of flour, Ellen," Hannah said. "And he's the kind of man a woman accepts because it makes sense." Ellen remained silent, waiting for the rest. "Caleb may make no sense at all to this town," Hannah continued. "He was John's best friend. The whole town will say there isn't a single good reason in the world for me to choose him." She looked across the hall, where Edmund was comfortably talking with the pastor. "As for the firewood, it's true, but it wasn't just once. For 2 winters he's been splitting firewood in the dark, so I wouldn't have to wake up cold and disappearing before I could thank him. A man like that, I wouldn't trade for any reason." Hannah picked up her shawl. "You and the town will have to forgive me, Ellen, but I've already decided." She left the celebration early. She rode back through the cold Wyoming night, with the dark mountains beneath the stars, and spent the entire journey thinking about the difference between what the town wanted for her and what she wanted for herself. She learned too late that those 2 things were rarely the same. John had been what she wanted against the judgment of half the town, and she had not regretted it for a single day. She was not about to start choosing according to other people's judgment now.
Before continuing, a brief notice. This is an original story created by Jocelyn Santos on July 12, 2026. All rights reserved. Registration of rights by third parties is prohibited, as is reproduction or use on other channels without the prior written authorization of the author.
February brought a brief and deceptive thaw, the kind that makes the cattle lift their heads thinking spring has arrived early. Hannah noticed that the firewood kept appearing, even though the cold was easing, even though it was no longer necessary. And she noticed something else. Caleb had been repairing things that were not his. The gate to her corral, which had been sticking for months, was loose and working properly one morning. A rotten porch board had been replaced with good wood, without a word. She saw traces of his work all over the property, like someone reading on the ground, the path of an animal that never lets itself be seen. She said nothing. She simply began leaving coffee on the porch early each morning, covered in a mug beside the pile of firewood. On the first day, the mug remained full. On the second day, too. On the third, it was empty by morning, washed and turned upside down to drain. Neither of them spoke about it, but it became another ritual between them. Silent, stubborn, and without either of them needing to name it, completely comfortable. Caleb went to see her on a Thursday afternoon, with the sun still high, mounted on horseback and holding his hat in his hand, and knocked on the door. Hannah opened it and knew, just by looking at him, that something had changed. "It's not Tuesday," Hannah said. "No, it isn't," Caleb said. He turned his hat in his hands. "I've been thinking about what happened." "I noticed," Hannah said. "You think slowly, Caleb." "I think carefully," Caleb corrected with a faint smile on his lips. "That's true too," Hannah said, and waited. Caleb looked at the hat in his hands, then at her. "Edmund Shaw is a good man," Caleb said. "The whole town knows that. He has means, he has good judgment, and there are plenty of good reasons for you to choose him. I can't compete with good reasons." "Then don't," Hannah said. Caleb raised his eyes. "For 2 winters I convinced myself that staying away from you was honoring John's memory," Caleb said. "That loving my best friend's wife was theft. It took me far too long to understand that perhaps, even while sick, he knew who he trusted to take care of you." He tightened his grip on his hat. "I didn't come to honor his memory by staying away. I came to honor his memory by being honest. I would like to court you properly, Hannah, if you'll let me." Hannah looked at the man standing at her door, shy with his hat in his hands. "Caleb Ward," Hannah said, "I've been waiting for you to find the courage for more than a year." Caleb took that in. It took him a moment. "I've been thinking about it," Caleb said with a full smile on his lips. "Come in. I made coffee and it's still hot," Hannah said. Their courtship unfolded the way it does for people who have known each other for years and only finally admit aloud what had already been true. There were no grand gestures, but there were dinners in Hannah's kitchen and conversations on Caleb's porch. Sunday afternoons with the two of them riding side by side across the land between the two properties and along the creek. Caleb kept bringing firewood, and Hannah kept leaving coffee. Only now he stayed to drink the coffee with her, sitting at the kitchen table while they talked as the light grew through the eastern window. Rufus, the dog, liked the new arrangement. He crossed the creek after Caleb and lay between them in the kitchen, looking as though he had arranged the whole thing himself and was pleased with it. Ashford had opinions about the way things were going, but small towns always do. Ellen thought it was all very romantic and said so loudly to anyone who wanted to hear. Edmund Shaw handled it with grace, and Hannah liked him for that. Before spring arrived, Edmund was already courting a farmer's daughter from the south. The pastor considered the matter delicate and spoke with Caleb, which required courage, and Caleb listened respectfully, even though he disagreed. "She's your best friend's widow, Caleb," the pastor said. "People are going to talk." "They certainly will," Caleb said, "and they'll stop when they find something else to talk about. John asked me to take care of her, and that's what I'm doing." He put on his hat. "The difference is that now I can say the reason without fear." The pastor thought about that, nodded in agreement, and made no further comments. There was an afternoon in March that Caleb never told Hannah about. He was crossing the creek on horseback, on his way to have dinner at her house, and stopped in the middle of the crossing. He did not stop because something was wrong. He stopped because everything was right, and that frightened him. A kind of fear he had never felt before. He stood there with the lights of Hannah's kitchen glowing ahead of him, and understood where he was going. It was not just dinner. It was not just Hannah. It was wanting again. Wanting for real. Loving something so deeply that you are afraid of losing it. He stood there in the darkness for a while. Then he moved on. Hannah opened the door before he knocked, because she always heard him when he crossed the creek on horseback, and said that dinner was getting cold. Caleb entered the house, smelled the supper, looked at her, and thought that this was what he had almost never allowed to happen because he had thought too much. That late afternoon, Caleb noticed something. Just as she noticed his work scattered around her property, he noticed what she had quietly been building around him without saying a word. The house that was too large for one person was making room for two. a second mug on the shelf beside hers, a coat hook by the entrance where his coat now hung, the chair at the end of the table, empty for 2 winters, with someone sitting in it again. Hannah had done all of that without saying anything, in her own way, and Caleb realized he had already been living there for weeks, and neither of them had said a single word about it. He proposed on a Thursday again, in the afternoon, on the same porch step where he had stacked firewood for 2 winters. He did not prepare a speech. That was not who he was, and Hannah would have become suspicious if he had. "I'm slow," Caleb said. "You've already told me that, and you're right. But I didn't want to be slow now." He took a simple gold ring from his coat pocket, one that had belonged to his mother. "I didn't come to replace John, Hannah. I came because life moved on, and it moved in your direction." He looked at the ring, then looked at her. "I would very much like you to be my wife." Hannah looked at the ring, then looked at him. "Caleb Ward," Hannah said, "you are the most cautious man I have ever known." "Is that a yes?" Caleb asked. "It has always been a yes," Hannah said. "I was just waiting for you to ask." He placed his mother's ring on her finger, right there on the porch step, in the late afternoon light of Wyoming. Not to erase what had come before, but to move forward. Hannah looked at the ring with a smile on her face and tears in her eyes. Then she threw herself into Caleb's arms. The two were married on a Saturday morning at the church in Ashford. The whole town came, because everyone had an opinion about the matter and wanted to see how it ended. Hannah wore a green dress, the color of Wyoming's fields after a week of spring rain. It was the dress she had sewn herself during her first winter alone, when she still did not know whether she could keep the ranch going. Wearing it that day was her way of saying that she had made it, and that she was finally ready to move forward. Caleb wore his good coat and stood at the altar. He watched Hannah walk toward him, and thought about all the mornings when he had almost not found the courage to knock on her door. He had come very close to not being there, and he knew that better than anyone. Ellen cried in the second pew, happy to have given the wrong advice and to have lost the argument. Edmund Shaw sent his congratulations to the couple. Hannah understood, and she took no offense. Rufus waited at the church door, and when the two came out, he was the first to greet them, circling Caleb's legs, as he did every late afternoon on the porch. The house changed that spring. Not the building itself, but its atmosphere. The silence that had lived in every corner gave way to something else. The sound of 2 lives sharing the same space, and the house that had once seemed too large for one person now seemed exactly the right size for 2. The 2 divided the work, not according to custom, but according to what each did best. Hannah managed the ranch's accounts because she had a better head for numbers than Caleb, and they both knew it. Caleb took care of the cattle and the fences because he had known that land since before Hannah arrived. Sometimes Caleb cooked, sometimes Hannah repaired a fence post, and neither of them found that strange. The land that had been hers and the land that had been his became one thing, on this side of the creek and on the other, with no fence in between separating what now belonged to both of them. Caleb continued bringing firewood during the winters that followed. Only now he no longer brought it in the dark before sunrise, to disappear unseen. He brought it during the day, with Hannah beside him, the two of them splitting and stacking it together on the porch. What had once been his secret became their routine, and the coffee she had left covered in the mug became hot coffee served at the table for 2 every morning. Rufus, who was already an old dog, became slower with time, but he never lost the habit of lying between the 2 of them in the kitchen, as though he were still watching over what he had helped bring together. When he passed away a few weeks later, Caleb remained silent for a while, and Hannah held his hand, and neither of them needed to say anything. One afternoon in September, Hannah found Caleb sitting on the porch step. He was looking toward the western mountains, with his usual way of being quiet when he was happy. She sat beside him, smoothing her dress over her rounded belly. "Are you happy?" Hannah asked. Caleb looked at the mountains a little longer. "I've never felt so happy," Caleb said, gently caressing her belly, feeling the baby move. Hannah placed her hand over his and rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you know what I think sometimes?" Caleb said. "That morning, I almost didn't tell the truth. I thought about going back home and pretending the question didn't exist." "I know," Hannah said. "I could see it on your face that you wanted to run away." "Then why did you ask?" Caleb said. "You could have left things the way they were. It would have been easier." Hannah thought for a moment. "Because 2 years of firewood at my door is no small thing, Caleb," Hannah said. And I had already lost one good man without being able to do anything. I wasn't going to lose another one just because neither of us had the courage to say what we felt. She squeezed his hand. Someone had to take the lead, and with your calm nature, it certainly wasn't going to be you. Caleb laughed softly. It was true, and they both knew it. Thank you for asking. I would never have forgiven myself for losing the family we are building, Caleb said, kissing the top of her head. The afternoon slowly faded, and the mountains held the day's last light high above. And in every way that truly mattered, that moment was more than enough for both of them. Dear listeners, we have reached the end of another story, and perhaps you are thinking that this is just another story and that real life does not happen this way. Perhaps you believe that your time has already passed, that your chance disappeared along with someone, or along with the years, or along with a loss that no one but you ever felt. I want to talk for a moment with those of you who think that way. Caleb spent 2 years believing that caring from a distance was all he still had to offer. He did not believe he deserved anything more. Not because someone told him that, but because he convinced himself, in the same quiet way, that we also convince ourselves. And do you know what almost happened? He almost lost the most beautiful thing life still had waiting for him, love. It was not fate that almost took that away from him. It was fear. Perhaps you have loved and lost. Perhaps you think you already had your share of happiness, and that dreaming about it again is asking too much. But love does not work that way. It is still there, whole and complete, waiting for somewhere to go. And it has no age, no deadline, no appointed day when it stops happening. I want you not only to hear this, but to keep it in your heart. Being happy again does not erase the memory of someone who is gone. Someone who truly loved you would not want to see you alone, waiting for life to end in endless mourning. On the contrary, they would want to see you happy, and it is entirely possible that this person is already nearby. Perhaps they are quietly doing good, caring for you without asking for anything, without making a fuss, without expecting anything in return, simply waiting for the day when you lift your eyes and see them. We spend so much time searching far away for what is often right in front of us. You deserve to be loved, and many times, the only thing missing for that to happen is the courage to open the door and ask. Thank you once again for staying with me until the end. If you are not yet subscribed to our Boundless Ranch Love channel, subscribe now and turn on the notification bell, because from the bottom of my heart, I eagerly look forward to meeting you in the next story.